Thank you very much to the local organizers, University of Milano, EAP, Scientific Committee of Expo 2015, and Italian Association of Animal Production. Well, within the general topic of this conference, Sustainability Analysis and Life Cycle Assessment, I would like to focus a little bit on multifunctionality, because we are used to think that agricultural systems in Europe are multifunctional, but we say it very often, but certainly we are not very serious about it. So I'm going to try to introduce this concept into this sustainability framework. So this is the outline of my presentation. I will define multifunctionality very briefly. I will then move to explain very briefly a case study, Mediterranean and Spain, on how we evaluate sustainability and carbon footprint using life cycle assessment. And in the second part of my talk, I will try to value these multiple functions of livestock systems here in Europe, at least in the Mediterranean Europe, with two perspectives, sociocultural and economic. And then finally, I will move to some final couple of general messages. So, well, here maybe it's not necessary to repeat what has been said many times before, but it's not just food production we are discussing today when we discuss agriculture. We discuss, well, of course, the three pillars of sustainability, or the different big, broad types of functions: social, cultural issues. For example, in Italy, I don't have to explain about that. Economic, income of farmers, trade, marketing, etc. And of course, the environmental part of the problem, which is basically the four big issues are the soils, the water, climate change, and biodiversity. Okay. So let's start with a definition of multifunctionality. It's a systems-oriented concept. It's an holistic approach, as has been said before. And it addresses the fact that apart from producing private goods like milk or meat, agriculture also produces public goods. And those public goods can be different in different parts of the world. But in Europe, most studies, there are many public goods, but there are three that are particularly important today here because they're inherently linked to animal agriculture. And those public goods are the conservation of biodiversity, which is very much linked to the way we do agriculture in marginal areas, maintenance of cultural landscape, of course, and in this particular place, in Italy and especially in Spain, the prevention of hazards, in particular forest fires. So, animal agriculture has, of course, a lot of negative impacts, but also produces these other benefits, these other functions. And why is so? But because we have many different types of farming systems in Europe. Here you have a taxonomy of farming systems, and you have, in red, you have those that have high potential to produce public goods, extensive mixed arable pastoral systems, or extensive outdoor livestock silvopastoral systems. And you have other systems that have low potential to produce these public goods, intensive livestock, permanently housed livestock, and, for example, horticulture under glass. So the message is we have different types of systems, and they produce different things. Some are better in terms of productivity or in terms of producing private goods like milk or meat, and others are better producing some other things. So let's move to a real case study, and I will discuss on sheep production systems in Mediterranean and Spain, where we have a diversity of systems. We have from very extensive pastoral systems in which animals are all year round grazing, and they produce, the objective is 1 lambing per year. And the reproduction system is a very good indicator of intensity for sheep. So we have these other systems that try to accelerate the reproduction system of the animals, so it's a little bit more intensive. You have also this industrial system in which animals are all year round indoors, and they are to produce more lambings per year. And then also you have this dairy cheese system in the Basque Country in this case, with a very famous PDU cheese. So we have like a continuum of intensification between these very extensive and these very intensive systems. And you have the final evaluation of sustainability, but this is important according to the sustainability indicators as the farmers themselves have defined. So this is a global summary of sustainability, but the indicators of sustainability were defined by the farmers themselves and technicians. And then you see how there is a clear trade-off. In red, you see how these intensive systems are very good in economics, much better in economics, but lower potential to produce environmental sustainability, we could say. And the other way around for the extensive. So it's a clear trade-off between those two pillars. And well, the message is, yeah, there are trade-offs, it's been said before, and it's possible to get win-win solutions, but it's easier to say than to do it. This is my personal opinion, at least. Let's focus a little bit on the environmental pillar. And to do so, I will focus on carbon footprinting. So, again, also the final result, I don't have time to explain the details of the methodology, but it's been done with LSA analysis, and the professor, De Boer from Wageningen, is one of the authors of this study. So you have here the classical result for sheep or for any species. The more you intensify, the less is your carbon footprint because it's measured per kilo of meat. And of course, those are much more, the productivity here is higher, so the carbon footprint is higher. But if we want to include this multifunctionality, and we want to be serious about that, then you have other products, other services, apart from producing meat. If you include these other services and you allocate the emissions to the different products, and those products, as I said before, are inherently linked to extensive livestock farming systems, meaning that if you want to preserve biodiversity or maintain cultural landscape, you have to add on animal agriculture, because they're inherently linked, and they have no market price. So, but we try to do that, and I'll explain very briefly how we did it, but the picture changes completely. So we expand the boundary of our analysis by including these ecosystem services or these other functions of agriculture, and we allocate with the amount of money the farmer gets from producing meat or producing public goods from agro-environmental policies of the Common Agricultural Policy. And then we can allocate according to the different services, and then the picture changes. So, as I said, when you expand your boundary, things get a bit more complicated. Okay, so let's move to the second part of my talk, in which I will try to quantify this multifunctionality, and to do so I will use the more novel concept of ecosystem services. And I will first define ecosystem services, which well, is a relatively novel concept, as I said, coming from this Millennium Ecosystem Assessment in 2005. And our ecosystem services are direct and indirect benefits people, so humans are at the center of the definition, obtained from nature, from ecosystems, and from agroecosystems. And there are different types. The first one is the provisioning ecosystem services, food, timber, fiber, fresh, things we get from agroecosystems. Regulating ecosystem services, those that are regulating processes that are key in ecosystems, for example, regulation of climate, erosion prevention, etc., water regulation. Supporting ecosystem services, which are the basic services for life to exist, like photosynthesis, soil formation, nutrient cycling, and so on. And these other ecosystem services called cultural, which from the human perspective are also very important. Non-material benefits people obtain from ecosystems or agroecosystems, spiritual enrichment, enjoying a beautiful landscape, recreation, education, research, all these things are also produced by agroecosystems. So the value of this framework is that there is a complete inventory of different services that agroecosystems or animal agriculture can give us. But how do we value these other functions? Because they operate, it's been said before, they have very different functional units. You can compare kilos of meat and emissions, but how do you compare kilos of meat and biodiversity or landscape, which is very subjective? They operate normally at much larger scales, in temporal and spatial scales, so it's difficult. They are perceived differently from different people, and they don't have market price. So it's quite a big challenge to evaluate, to quantify functions of agriculture. And you have basically three methods. You can do it in biophysical terms, and there is an increasing body of literature on how particular practices in agriculture, on an animal agriculture, in livestock production, affect different services. There is a very nice review last year in Animal, in 2014. Or you can also follow a sociocultural perspective and an economic perspective. And I will focus on those last two perspectives to evaluate these ecosystem services or functions of animal agriculture. Okay, so the first sociocultural perspective, what we have done is do some participatory research, doing focus groups with citizens and farmers, in which we try to address the relationships between pastoral grazing systems. So here we exclude the industrial systems. It was not the focus of our research, and the environment. And well, we can quantify more or less what these meetings were about and the number of times people mention different items. And you can see here what are like those items are, of course, food, but always discussed, nearly always discussed food in terms of quality. So distinguishing very well the food coming from these particular systems from other more standard systems, we could say. In the case of Spain, forest fires is very important. We have a big problem with that, and people are very sensitive to this problem. But here you see here biodiversity maintenance also was very important. There were differences between farmers and citizens, but not so big differences. And finally, landscape. Landscape was at the top of the different ecosystem services that appear during these conversations. Of course, it's much more complex because people perceive many links among things. And I don't have, of course, time to explain these graphs, but you see the farmers and the citizens, and you see how the different practices are related to the different services. And this is not guided by the researchers, it's just spontaneous conversations among the stakeholders, okay? And here, again, you see the 4 dimensions, but they're perceived in bundles, in groups. They are not easily perceived isolated because they are not isolated. There are, of course, multiple interrelationships. But again, you see health quality, for example, from the citizen perspective is key when you discuss animal production in intensive conditions. And they clearly perceive these products as having differentiated quality, or biodiversity, or forest fires, or landscape. Okay, so from the sociocultural perspective, can be done, but of course we don't have a figure, so we can try to do it also from the economic perspective. But how do we measure things that do not have public, price in the market? So we try to calculate what the economists say total economic value, which is the sum of output values generated by the ecosystem or our ecosystem now and in the future, and also considering risk issues. Let's explain this a little bit better with this next figure. So there is a taxonomy of values of things, use values and unused values. And the use values are the direct use values, for example, meat or fish or milk or wool or wood. Indirect use values is those benefits we get from, for example, preventing forest fires or preventing flooding or from water purification. This other value is the value of living things for our own use in the future. This also have a value. And those non-use values are what is called in English bequeathed value, which is the value of living things for our children. This also have a value. And this is very much related to sustainability, of course. Or the existence value, which is the right of existence of things. Many people think that different species, for example, have intrinsic values. Okay, the problem is that the more you move towards the right of the graph, it's less tangible, it's much more difficult to measure. So we do that, well, first define the non-use values is those that do not involve direct or indirect use of the ecosystem service, or the function of agriculture if you want, but reflect the satisfaction that individuals derive from the knowledge that they exist. For example, you go to the countryside and you observe a beautiful agricultural landscape with animals. It's very much related to moral, religious, and aesthetic properties of individuals, and they don't have market price. So the economists, environmental economists and marketing economists are using this, what is called stated preference methods, and I will explain a case study using choice modeling, and I will explain a little bit about this, not in economic terms, of course, in mathematical terms, but this methodology tries to simulate our rational or irrational process of deciding things. If you want to buy a car, you will be making trade-offs between maybe brand, consumption, safety, etc., and price, of course, you can pay. So this choice modeling tries, in our case, we evaluate different scenarios, different policy scenarios, defined by a number of attributes. I will show you in a mini image immediately afterwards: vegetation, biodiversity index, and so on. And by making these trade-offs, people can give us a hint on how much they will be willing to pay for those. So our experiment was done in a particular area in the north of Spain, and we worked with two populations: the local people living in the area and the general people. And here you have the current policy. This is the real landscape. This is an endangered species, very much dependent on livestock because it's bone of carcasses. Very emblematic species. Number of forest fires per year is this. We have for quality products, and this is what we pay through our environmental policies. Each person in this region is paying this money. 1 minute? 2 minutes. Okay, I will finish in roughly. Yeah. And then you have two other options. That is called abandonment option or a liberalization option. It's much cheaper, but they have abandonment of landscape, lower biodiversity, more forest fires, and so on, and a target support scenario in which things improve a little bit, but you have to pay more. Okay, by offering people, many people, a representative sample of the population, different combinations of these attributes, not everybody is valuing this, they're valuing different combinations of these attributes, we can get to the results. And in the results, you see here the local population and the general population. You see how the local population is willing to pay much more than the general population. Also, nice difference is that they perceive differently different ecosystem services. The locals perceive a very rich agricultural landscape as very nice, very positive, whereas here they prefer a bit more natural landscape, but they give more importance to biodiversity. Quality products is important in both places, and as you can see here, forest fires, people are very sensitive to this topic, and it's easy also to understand the relationship, so people place a lot of importance. It's also important to notice that this is the real support we are giving, and this is what the society would be willing to pay. So it's a big margin for policymakers to try to, we could say, refocus the common agricultural policy in these areas, which are very, very frequent in Europe, around 50% of European land, especially in the Mediterranean. So my final slide is, of course, we evaluate this, but let's move a little bit. We also can evaluate the scenarios. And if we move to this abandonment scenario, you can see how this step is even bigger, meaning that they are willing to pay for improving things, but what they don't want is abandonment. It's even more the difference. They would be paying more money to avoid abandonment than they would pay money to improve things. Okay, so abandonment is, of course, a big problem of these areas, and people perceive this as very negative. So my two final remarks is that, well, animal agriculture can be multifunctional, but not all systems are multifunctional, okay? Because some produce ecosystem services and some produce ecosystem disservices, we could say. And there is a need to objectively evaluate those public goods, because if you don't evaluate the public goods, they're ignored in evaluation frameworks and they're ignored in policy. So it's important to place a value on those services of animal agriculture. And thank you very much.